Share. Yes. Can you all see my screen by any chance?
It's loading.
Yes, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay. Okay. So good afternoon, everybody. Our today's class I intend to cover in two parts, but let's see how our time permits, and let's see. It depends upon the kind of doubts or the kind of things we can help resolve. Please understand that considering myself and Neeraj are both part of your technology studio, okay, and that we are also part of the construction lecture, any kind of construction doubts or any kind of resolutions, yeah, that you find that for tomorrow's class, and particularly this class is planned on a Tuesday, such that if there are something that you have started working over the weekend and you gather that it is not resolving the way you want it, or there is some doubt, like you may be planning out ramps to your basement, or you may be planning out a particular roof detail, a particular girder, a particular truss, a particular roofing system, a particular walling system, certain detailing in a slab. At the end of the class, that opportunity always lies that you can share your screen and we can discuss that. Yeah, you need not leave it. You need not leave everything for your guides all the time. Yeah, if it is design related, if it is, if it is something of that sort, it's a different thing. But to a very large extent, if it is related to technology, or if it is related especially to construction or structures, yeah, then one can feel free to get that resolved, because if you get that resolved on a Tuesday evening or a Tuesday afternoon, it can help you work throughout the Tuesday evening, such that you can have something for Wednesday. Now today's request and is also part of the work that we are to do. And if you look at the fifth semester syllabus, it largely talks about shallow basements. And let we also understand that our project too would have in some sense basements to help the building work well. Yeah. And so it makes sense that we discuss all aspects of foundation today. Okay, how does one go about? And we'll also do a recap. And as last time, sometimes someone had, I think Shravan had very rightly pointed out that if there is a good mix between PowerPoints and sketching classes, it will help. And so it is like that. We had made this kind of presentation last semester for all kinds of foundation systems, and let's hope we can that can help today. So first of all, we'll look at the very basics of load bearing foundation. Last year we had a couple, and even this time I have a couple of students in my group who are talking about composite construction. And what does composite construction mean? Composite construction means that I could have certain columns, certain trabeated system, that is column beam structure, and I can also have a good play of load bearing structural system that means there can be load bearing walls, either brick walls or stone walls, also related to the construction, that means in line with the trabeated system. Some of them can be freestanding walls, yeah, just in order to create some kind of impressions. Yeah, do not forget, yeah, I do not know if you, most of the time we do not try to ape our old vernacular constructions. Yeah, like that means if in the nearby vicinity, if there are load bearing construction, that does not mean that we also go about building in the similar manner, but we could use some of those materials and create those impressions by making certain walls, by making certain things such that such that it helps us to create those kind of impressions that are there. Yeah. So most of the time we use load bearing construction such that, yeah, such that we are in a position to create such impressions. Yeah. And in that sense, you would have a composite structural system that is part load bearing, part framed. Your entire building can be framed, your entire building can be load bearing. There is but naturally just no cap, or there is no limitation to that. So one needs to understand that in load bearing structural system, usually one talks about the load of the wall going entirely down, as you see here in these, as you see in these diagrams. The wall goes down, it sits on a concrete pad. And if you see in brick, usually the brick has offsets. Yeah, the brick offsets down. That means, as we all know, the width of the foundation is 2D plus 300. I do not know in the first, I'm sure in the first year this must have been covered, that the width of the load bearing foundation is usually twice the width of the wall above, as well as 150 on either side, that comprises of the concrete pad. So usually that is, yeah, so usually the lower breadth, yeah, of a stepped footing is twice the thickness of the wall plus 300. Yeah, in that sense. So in so brick walls usually tend to, brick walls have the opportunity to step down. But this diagram that you see is not right. Usually the stepping is not so close by. Usually the stepping is not so close by. Usually the stepping steps, because the foundation goes really low below. It is not as close to the way it is shown here. So this isn't a right diagram in that sense. Yeah. In some sense, this is the right diagram where the offsets are large. Yeah. The offsets are not close by. Every layer is not an offset. The offsets are in some sense large as they go below the ground. Yeah. And they go as good as 2 meters, 2.5 meters below the ground. When we do specification, when we material specification, we will understand that excavating below the ground for normal foundations vis-a-vis excavating below the ground for basements or for deep foundations, yeah, it matters a lot. The more you go below the ground, more are the problems, more is the expenses, more is the material use, and all those aspects that are there. That's why most of the time we tend to go a little below the ground. There are numerous projects where you actually see that the building has got part below the ground. Yeah, it's not a full basement. It's a part basement below the ground and part above the ground. It helps a lot in material consumption. It helps a lot in the kind of digging that goes in, the efforts that go. A lot of effort is conserved in doing all of that. So what you see to the left, so here to the right is a diagram, to the right again is a diagram which in some sense is right and in some sense is not right. That's why most of the time when we rely on internet based images, it's not necessary that they are right. So to the left, you are seeing a brick foundation whereby the brickwork becomes double and the pad is 300 more than the brickwork that is there. So 2T plus 300. Whereas what you see to the right shows that the stone foundation wall also staggers. Usually it is very difficult to make this stagger when you're dealing with stone. The other truth is that most of the time, at least in Maharashtra, we avoid using any brick below the ground. So if you make a load bearing bungalow, if you make a load bearing institute, or if you make or even if you make a compound wall, you may have brickwork above the ground, but below the ground, usually you have basalt stone, which is so easily available and which is so rough and easy to work with. Yeah. Easy to work with does not mean that it is easy to cut. What I'm saying, it is easily available. And when I do not have to do very coarse rubble masonry or things that you have learned in the first year, it becomes very easy to just dig a just dig a strip, yeah, just dig a thick strip of the width of 2t plus 300 and dump the rubble below. So what you see to the right in this diagram here is what is right. Usually the width of the stone wall below the ground remains constant vis-a-vis the kind of width that remains of the brick wall is usually stepped. So brick walls below the foundation are usually stepped. Stone walls below the foundation are usually constant. Yeah, and and you don't need to actually go below the ground and start building stone walls. So this is the difference you will see between a stone foundation or a load bearing foundation vis-a-vis a trabeated foundation. In a trabeated foundation, and that's the big saving. Why do people not go about building large load bearing constructions? Because the kind of material that is going to go below the ground in load bearing is immense, because everything that is above the ground is also going to go below the ground. Everything that goes below the ground is also to go, everything that is above the ground is also to go below the ground. Yeah. So in that sense, the kind of material that is going to go in a load bearing foundation is much, much larger. And that's why in today's day and time, it makes sense where when you when you work with material economics, it makes sense to go in for systems whereby there can be a larger saving of material. Similarly, in a trabeated foundation or in a trabeated structure like that you see to the right, it is only those columns that are going below and are getting connected by either plinth beams, yeah, and all that the load is getting transferred through is what is called as an isolated footing. So load bearing foundations are called as strip foundations because they are laid in entire strips, whereas uh, uh, so to say, what do you call, uh, trabeated or framed structures have what are called as isolated footings. So what you're seeing to the left is the entire hatch of the entire wall. So in your when you make foundation drawings for your working drawings, this is the major difference in representation that you're going to see. If you have load bearing walls, your entire walls will be shown hatched. They'll go below the wall. I'm sure in the lower years, in your last year's IDS, some of you all must have dealt with either load bearing and frame structures, and accordingly you'll have made a foundation drawing. Similarly, in framed construction, all you will see is the hatch of the column. All you will see is the footing around it, and you will see that columns are further connected using plinth beams. Yeah. Yeah. Now, trabeated construction or framed construction has that big advantage that the foundations are further connected using plinth beams, something that is happening in load bearing construction. Load bearing construction or in stripped foundation, it is all interconnected at below the ground too. In frame structure also, plinth beams are something that connect. Plinth beams are something that are connecting below the ground all the footings, thereby not allowing the footings to separate off in case there are floods, in case there are earthquakes. Yeah. So below the ground, there is a tie between all the foundation, and that is very important. And that is what perhaps plinth beams land up doing. Yeah. Now, what's the difference between an isolated footing framed structure and a frame structure that goes down and becomes what is called as a basement? So that's the difference. What you can see here, that isolated columns go down and form isolated, or columns go down and give you isolated footings. Yeah, and that is all that you need to dig around. You don't need to dig the entire length of the wall. You just need to dig a little more than the width of the column that actually goes down to become a footing. Whereas when I'm dealing with a basement, I actually need to dig the entire width of the building, or as much that I want as the basement. Yeah. And it is literally a kind of a container. or a box that is made and tucked into the ground, whereby the bottom is all well connected. Yeah, the bottom is all well connected. That means all your columns are well connected in the bottom by an element that is now not called as a footing but a raft. Yeah, so we have a raft. I think the if you imagine what a raft is something that needs to float over water. Yeah, we create rafts to float in water. Similarly, this raft is also actually allowing your building to float. Only thing, it is floating above soil. And let me tell you, in construction systems, soil is considered as good as a fluid thing, and your building is as good as a float over the ground that is there. Yeah. So what you have in that sense, yeah, what you have in that sense is the raft is allowing all the columns to get connected by creating a plane below the ground, as you see here. In some sense, where the columns come, in some areas the cross section of the raft is a little larger, if you see visually. In some areas the raft is thin. Most of the times the raft is of the same thickness. Yeah, there can be staggers, there can be undulations in the raft in order to conserve material and things like that. But it could also be constantly laid all throughout. Yeah. So the raft is one element, and the vertical walls that go to the sides of the raft are called retaining walls. Those also can be done in are usually done in RCC in order to finish off the entire box that gets tucked below the ground. It's also in RCC known as retaining walls. So now you have a system that comprises of an entire slab laid below the ground called as a raft, vertical RCC walls that are called as retaining walls, and a slab on the top to further finish off and create a new ground level, yeah, with the help of a slab. So now that's the difference, and that's how your building is going to be looking at. Yeah. So now just let us look at some of the understandings let's look at the differences between very simple let us look at some very simple foundation details as compared to rafts and things like that. So an isolated footing has just reinforcement only at the bottom. Yeah. RCC footing has just reinforcement laid only at the bottom with a bent bar on top. Yeah. So it's a mesh, it's an entire mesh that is laid only at the bottom of the slab. Yeah. Do not forget, this mesh is only there to spread the load. Yeah, equidistantly spread the load over the soil that it is there. You can see all the three images. Yeah, you can see what is done in 3D and drawn in section corresponds to how the footing is bars are laid in reality, and how the column bars get entangled. Yeah, the column bars that come all the way from the top of the building, how they come and get entangled into this mesh that is laid below. It just it just bends. Yeah, that just bends and lays below. So if you look at the 3D, in that sense, the 3D done, the drawing 3D is not entirely correct, because the drawing 3D does not show how the columns come and get entangled into the mesh below. Whereas the photograph to the right, top right, actually shows how the column members, how the column steel comes down and bends to get entangled with the mesh of the footing. Yeah. Should you have any doubts, please feel free to interrupt. There is nothing wrong in interrupting in if something is not clear, other than asking their doubts at the end. This is not necessary in this. If the doubt is small and can help, I may miss out on something, and so if ever there is a doubt, you can always inquire in between. Now the footing is cast. There are various types of footings that are cast. A footing can be cast in entire rectangle, but it is found that trapezoidal footings are more material effective, cost effective. And so as you see to the right bottom, the image to the right bottom shows that you have trapezoidal footings with limited thickness. The thickness along the edges is less. The thickness along the footing is large, and it usually slopes down. So that's the difference. In the diagram to the left, the concrete is shown to be a rectangular cuboid with no slopes. But as we all know, you can save on the material of the footing by sloping the footing to be made into a trapezoidal footing. Yeah, and these are what are called as plinth beams. Yeah, these are further what are called as plinth beams. Yeah, they help connect the footing at various levels. Yeah, footings that are plinth beams are also further of two types. Plinth beams that are usually on the periphery, yeah, which we usually call as external, are usually lower, thereby helping you to do brickwork on top of them. So peripheral plinth beams or external plinth beams are usually lower, and internal plinth
Wait,
beams,
I have a question.
yeah, just a minute. Internal plinth beams are usually higher. So internal plinth beams are higher and external plinth beams are little lower in order to help pass services, do brickwork and stuff like that. Yeah, what is your doubt?
So there's like I just wanted to ask you what and how if there's a basement, how the basement and the network of the plinth beams is connected in that case. Like how are they the joinery, how does it happen? Or is it just like uh monolithic like because it's RCC?
Yes, it will be more or less monolithic, and I will be discussing details of slab and plinth beam with regards to basement a little early later. I'll explain that. Yeah. Yes, I will explain that. Yeah, we'll explain all those. This is the normal. This is a normal. What this is in the normal case where we have a footing which are further connected using plinth beams, either plinth beams at the lower level or at the higher level. As you can also see, service lines are laid like all kinds of internal pipes, yeah, drains, pipes, if they are passing through the building, electrical conduits, cables, if they are to be brought in via the plinth, if the building is really large, yeah, then these are laid at the level of the plinth. And so there is a concept called as internal and external plinth beams. As and when as your case works out, you'll further know how it, yeah, we'll know, we should be in a position to explain, or in a separate sketch I'll explain how an internal plinth beam is different from that of an external plinth beam. Now, footings, isolated footings are not only related to RCC, they are most common for RCC, yeah, but there is also an isolated footing, well known as in steel, which is well known as grillage foundation. So grillage foundations are nothing but isolated footings made in entirely mild steel. And what does that mean? That means that s- okay, I lay a certain number of members. If you look at the plan, yeah, there are certain number of I sections. If you look at the plan as well as the 3D to the left, there are certain I sections that are spaced out in order to create this kind of a platform, in order to create this kind of a footing. So there are certain I sections that are laid down in one direction. Then there are a couple of them, fewer, that are laid in the other direction, onto which a plate is laid and the column comes and connects it. Yeah. So if you correlate the section, the 3D and the plan, you'll understand best that the lowermost level has the members spaced out in a manner to be in a position to create the width of the footing, the width and the length of the footing, the spread of the footing. Yeah. The second layer comprises only 2 or 3 members that only allows to spread the load of the column over these members. Okay. So you don't want the column to come and sit on a couple of few members of the last layer. You want the column to come and lay its load over a couple of members that spread the load over all the members that are laid below. That actually gives you the width and the depth of the footing. Yeah, and this is in just two layers, along with in just two layers comprising of couple of I beams, many I beams on the lower level, couple of I beams at the upper level, and a base plate. I am able to create what is called as a mild steel footing. Now, please understand, this is a rare phenomena. We don't use steel in subterranean structures for a number of reasons. If you see in the section, even after the steel grillage, it is further covered with concrete, because we all know that the moisture level below the ground is very high. The possibility of the steel to deteriorate via rusting is very high. Also, if you look at the amount of steel that you actually saw in this footing, look at the amount of steel that actually goes in creating a mesh, bare minimum. As compared to the volume of the footing, the steel that is going in the foundation is bare minimum. So in that sense, yeah, so in that sense, the amount of steel that you are using in a grillage foundation is far larger. Yeah, thereby making this kind of steel grillage foundation highly uneconomical. Yeah, so where is grillage foundation used? Grillage foundations are largely used for temporary structures. Yeah, like like a circus tent. Yeah, a circus tent, I hope you gather, the mast of the center of the circus tent is usually very high. It comprises of a central column. Now, if that needs to have a foundation below, then it will have this kind of foundation. A foundation that can afford to dismantle and go. So if you're doing a circus tent in a public ground, but naturally you don't expect to make foundations and leave your foundations and go. So you dig a pit, you'd put in this kind of grillage foundation, put your supports whatsoever, be there for a month, few weeks, whatever that is there. And when you wind up, you bring down the tent. Yeah, you have the possibility to open up, nut bolt even your foundation, put them in your truck and take them with you for your next site. So for transitional or temporary foundations, grillage foundations work the best. Otherwise, they prove to be pretty expensive by way of the amount of material used. Plus, it is not advisable to use steel structures below the ground, cause it tends to deteriorate. Yeah. So you could also have yeah, so you could also have a composite system. So when someone says, when we have steel columns, what kind of foundation do we have for steel column structure? So you could have a composite system for a steel structure. Your
Uh,
columns could be in steel, and your footing below, yeah, or your could be actually in concrete. So you could have a stub column. You could have a stub column that could come in concrete. Someone have a doubt?
yeah, yeah.
Yes.
In the last slide in the grillage foundation, in the section it says there is a spacer bar. So then, is there a distance between like the two flanges of the I beams there? And then if it is
Yes.
there, then what is the minimum distance
So
or?
what happens is that the closer we keep the eye sections, the more the number of eye sections they're going to go in. So okay.
Hmm.
So it's not necessary that you place the eye section so close by that there is no space in them. The eye sections can easily be afford to be spaced out, as you see in the both in the diagram below, that is the plan below, and the 3D. So the eye sections are spaced out, okay, depending upon the width of the footing and depending upon the length of the footing. And how many eye sections should you be having? What should be the depth of the eye sections? Yeah, those will be given by the engineer, structural engineer, right?
Yeah.
Depending upon the load that comes on the column. Now, as I do not want, when I arrange these column, when I arrange these columns, I do not want them to be arranged in a particular way. I want them to be arranged in a
Jimmy, we can't hear you. Are you speaking?
Yeah, I guess his internet is fluctuating. Let me just check. Jimmy, you are on mute, I guess.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, now.
I think I got disconnected. Yeah. Can you hear me? Can you see the screen also?
Yes.
So the idea is that since the eye sections are placed a little apart, either both at the first layer as well as at the second level, while you are working, you do not want the eye sections to move, thereby causing a disturbance in the load transfer as well as the center of gravity. At such point of time, you have spacer bars, or you have, yeah, you have drilled holes through and through your eye sections, such that they can be held in position and they do not move. So those are your spacer bars that they are talking about, in order to hold the eye sections in position and not allow them to move. Am I clear?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll go ahead. So something that can replace the idea of not having a grillage foundation below the ground is by having what is called as an RCC footing, with a stub column. What are stub columns? Stub columns are those that come up only up to the ground level. They do not go beyond that. Yeah, they will be required for numerous other. You will have stub columns for numerous other, so to say, um, plinth level details. Like you may have steps, you may have an extended plinth. All of that load needs to go below the ground, and you can't make surfaces without proper load transfer. In such a case, you need what are called as stub columns. Yeah. So the stub column allows you to, the stub column allows the uh, steel column to get fitted, yeah, at the ground level without allowing your steel columns to go below the ground. So that's the kind of opportunities you get in case you are designing in steel and you don't want the column to go below the ground. Yeah. Or you don't want the column to go below the ground, and you want to have an RCC foundation, because RCC foundations in that sense are very cost effective because they have minimal steel in it. Yeah. And they weather the all other aspects of foundation below the ground. So in that sense, it works well. Now, what you're seeing here is called as combined footings or combined foundations. I do not know if these have been covered earlier, but when two foundations come very close by, it makes sense that you combine them by, yeah, by getting by, yeah, because two foundations, when they are too close by and literally touch each other, they can cause problems in the near future, because there is always some or the other movement in the building. So when footings are close to each other, they might as well be merged. Yeah. Especially when the columns are really close by. You should preferably avoid having columns close by, but in case they come close by, you can afford to merge them by something called as combined footings. So in combined footings, what you will see is the combined footing is made up of literally like a beam in between. That means that entire depth of the footing acts like a beam between the two columns, thereby giving stiffness to the column. Yeah. You will have a bar, like earlier you will have a mesh of bars at the bottom of the footing, but now you will also have a mesh of bars along the top of the footing. Yeah. So the top of the footing, in order to create literally like a beam, I will have bars both along the top of the footing as well as at the bottom of the footing. And as you see, the column bars are going and getting entangled at the bottom of the footing. Yeah. So these are what are called as combined footings. Yeah, you can see in both the diagrams to the right, you have a bar laid at the top of the footing 2. You have a bar laid at the bottom of the footing 2. The entire depth of of the connector or the combined footing is as good as depth of a beam, thereby giving stiffness as well as connecting the two beams as and how required. Yeah, yeah. Now these are what are called as cantilever footings or eccentric footings. What are eccentric footings and what are cantilever footings? These are kind of footings that are usually come to the end of your plot. Yeah, you literally have some things like you may have a ramp at the end of your plot. You have a building that touches you. I'm sure you've seen in cities and in towns buildings that are touching one another. They are called row houses. Yeah, my building touches your building at one particular end. Yeah, that means along the two sides of the row houses you cannot afford to have windows there, because there is a wall of your adjoining neighbor, whereas you can afford to have windows along the shorter or longer span. So you can afford to have windows on two sides. And that's what makes a row house different from that of a bungalow. A bungalow, in that sense, has windows from all four sides. A row house will share its wall with its neighbor. Now, when you have columns along the wall where you're sharing with the neighbor, you'll find that you cannot go into your neighbor's plot and lay down your footing on all four sides of the column. At such point of time, also, you have what is called as a combined footing or what is called as a strap beam that is connected between the footing in the near vicinity. So if you look at the diagram to the top left, yeah, at the column at the top left, you will see that the column sits along the edge of the footing. Your footing is what is called as an eccentric footing. Yeah, it is not a well balanced isolated footing. It is an isolated footing in some sense, but it is only on one side because you don't have the opportunity to go on the other side and cast your footing. And in order to maintain the center of gravity and stability, there is a strap beam, as you see both in the plan and the section. There is a strap beam as good as the width of the footing that goes and connects to the adjoining footing that is there, in order not to allow this particular column and footing to topple off structurally. So structurally, I'm doing a balancing act with the help of a strap beam. Yeah. And the depth of the strap beam is equivalent to that of the entire width of the entire beam of the footing, whereby you have bars again laid both at the top and the bottom. As we all know, beams comprise of two bars along the top and minimum two bars at the bottom with the help of stirrups. And so if I'm calling this as a strap beam, then I might as well have bars both at the top of the beam and at the bottom of the beam, thereby connecting the eccentric footing to the normal footing with the help of the strap beam. Yeah, to the right is a diagram that shows how this would work particularly. It comprises of both the column, eccentric foundation, and then but naturally strap beam that is there. Yeah, should you have any doubt, feel free to ask before we go ahead. Look at how the bars at the bottom left, look at how the bars of the column are entangled in the eccentric footing. Yeah, the bars are bent, brought down. All column bars are brought down, bent and entangled in the are brought down, bent and entangled in the lower mesh of the footing that is there. So the lower mesh of the footing always has the bars of the column that have come down and bent in order to create all kinds of stability. Should there be no problems, we'll go further to basements. Yeah. In continuation, in line with this idea, is in line with the idea that now, that now for a basement, all my columns are now connected with what is called as a raft. Okay, and you see a raft laid below. A raft comprises of a slab, yeah, comprising of bars both along the top as well as along the bottom, and the footing bars come down and entangle themselves into these bars in order to spread the load evenly. So most of the time the depth of your isolated footing and the width of the depth of the isolated footing can be larger than that of a raft, because don't forget, your entire load of the column is being spread by a limited area which is called as an isolated footing. In the case of a raft, your entire load of the column is spread by the entire raft. It is it is equally distributed along the entire raft. In some sense, the depth of the raft is usually lesser than the depth of an isolated footing. But don't forget, the extent of your isolated footing is very limited. The extent of your raft is large, thereby able to spread the load over the subsoil over a larger extent. And that's why the depth of the raft can afford to be low. Yeah. So look at the kind of bars that make up a raft. So there are bars both along the top and the bottom. The bars along the top are the bars along the bottom are actually to take the load of the column or the load transfer that's coming via the structure down, whereas the bar along the top helps the raft to take the upward thrust of the soil. So I have bars both along the top as well as along the bottom in order both to take either forces that is there. Don't forget, the soil below the raft is also giving an upthrust. And so you'd want to have a bar both along the top as well as at the bottom with stirrups such that these bars don't go haywire. Yeah. And in order to see that, family members are not, yeah, in that sense, it takes care in that sense, it takes care of the upward thrust as well as the downward thrust as well as the upward load. In that sense, it is in that sense. And the column bars are as normally entangled as they were entangled in isolated footings that are there. And you see that below the it becomes quite a mesh below the at the raft level. And there is something called as chairs. Yeah, there is something called as chairs that are laid that are laid between the bars, so that the bars of the top and the bars of the bottom do not collapse over each other while I'm laying concrete. So if you look at, there is the photograph to the top left. The photograph to the top left, what you see vertically, bent vertical bars are called as chairs. These are allowing the top bar to be held in position because the entire mesh of the top bars has immense load. There is a good possibility that this mesh comes down as and when I'm pouring concrete. In order to hold the upper mesh in position, in order to maintain the distance or the depth that is given by the structural engineer, I have something called as chairs. I have something called as chairs that hold my top bars as compared to my bottom bars. Yeah. And allow my concrete to fill in between. Yeah. I think this is the last of the slides before we go ahead. Yeah. So a raft comprises of what is called as a tow. Yeah. So the end of the raft usually comes to what is called a tow that helps in the waterproofing of the raft in some sense. So if you look at this detail, and I'll be sketching out some things after this part. So what you see, projecting out below beyond the raft is called as a toe, and that allows the retaining wall, further allows the retaining wall to spring up. Yeah, allows the retaining wall to spring up, thereby the kind of question that I had earlier, that the retaining wall and the raft are both homogeneous in some sense. Yeah, and what you see to the photograph to the right actually shows that before the raft is cast in concrete, there are vertical bars that are left out of the raft, thereby allowing the retaining wall to be cast in conjunction with the with the raft below. You can also see lightly in that photograph, in the photograph to the right below, you can see the chairs that are laid. If you pay attention, there are all these vertical members that you see in the raft that is holding the bars both along the top as well as along the bottom. Further to the right, top right, further to the top right, what you see on the outside is called as a box waterproofing, and I will come to that a little from now when I start sketching and explain you how this entire thing works out. So is there any doubt till now, or have you understood to whatever extent I have been able to talk, especially with regards to the raft? Now, with regards to the retaining wall and with regards to the slab, and as someone asked, how do plinth beams work and how things work, I'm going to sketch those out such that it helps everyone understand better. Till now, are things clear, or should you have any doubt, please make sure you can ask those queries. So by the time I go to the whiteboard, are there any doubts?
So when we're talking about water logging issues, does the foundation have to change its form, or is it just the basement retaining wall? If my site is prone to getting wet a lot because it's near the coast and heavy rainfall in Mumbai,
No, I didn't get your query, Shravan.
when we talk about water logging in a site, because my site is near the coast and there is heavy rainfall in Mumbai, especially now, will we have a basement retaining wall change its form, or will the basement stay the same?
No. Basements remain. See, you have to understand, basements are always provided with anti-flooding kind of uh, things planned in them. They are called as a sump. Okay. So first of all, you need to understand, when you build along the coast, the upthrust of the water or the soil into your raft is much, much larger. Yeah. So your raft thickness increases. Yeah. So in a normal dry condition, perhaps your basement rafts are some maybe 400 mm, 600 mm. They can be as small as 300 mm also. Yeah. Whereas if I'm talking of a raft of perhaps Oberoi Hotel at the edge of Nariman Point. Yeah, the raft of Nariman Point's the raft of Oberoi Hotel at Nariman Point is 7 feet deep. Okay, it's as good as 1 floor height. So that's the kind of the depth of the raft when I am working, when I am designing very close to the coast, or the upthrust is so high. So as good as someone can be entirely concreted. If you go on the net and check depths of rafts, you will find many such photographs where people are actually walking in between the top bar of the raft and the bottom bar of the raft. Yeah, that's the kind of depth rafts can go to. Yeah, that's largely because of it's as good as building a boat Yeah, it's your raft is literally like, and as the word suggests, raft, it's as good as that building is floating in water because the subsoil water level is so high, and that's what takes care. Yeah, that's one part of your question. The other part of the question is that basements will always have a tank in it. Yeah, some kind of a tank in it, which is called as a sump. Sump is nothing but a tank included in the floor of the raft, such that any basement that floods up to 150 mm, yeah, that is 6 inch of water all along the floor of the basement, that can be easily that can be easily collected in the sump. Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is that, just let me share my screen. Can you see my whiteboard?
It's got the loading sign, and I'm on reload. Okay, I can see something. Yeah, I think I find you.
No, I won't open this one. Just a minute. Huh? I'll dismiss this. Uh, I'll stop sharing. I'll open the stop presenting. Okay, I'll share again. I'll share my desktop and I'll share. Yeah. Can you see the blank screen?
It's actually loading, and I think my net is the issue also because
Yeah, we can see white.
You can see the whiteboard.
Yeah,
I
whiteboard.
I just loaded.
Yeah. So what I'm talking about is, so if I have to just sketch out a raft in some sense, which usually goes there. So raft will also always have a sump like that below. Yeah. If that's what I'm talking about. Yeah. So this is what I'm calling as the toe of the raft, which I've been talking about. It's a projection to the raft. Don't forget that there is your retaining wall, and here, but naturally you have an, and this is what is your sump below. So the capacity of this sump, yeah, the capacity of this sump is, if the entire floor of the basement is to flood, yeah, that is the volume of the sump is equivalent to the area of the basement floor into a depth of 6 inches, that is 150 mm. So if water fills 150 mm only, up to 150 mm into your basement, then that entire water can be directed into the sump, and from the sump it will get pumped out. But something like what has happened yesterday and day before, yeah, if I'm not mistaken, an entire building's parking lot in Kandivali has got flooded, which was used by MCGM for private car parking. The entire basement has got flooded because of the kind of rains and things like that are there. Then, but naturally, it's a different issue. Yeah. But let me tell you, a year, 2 years back, yeah, 2 years back, in some sense, basement can be a big relief. I'll tell you, 2 years back, I was caught in an area which was heavily flooding. There was incessant rain, and I was bold enough to drive down. And no sooner than later, I gathered that water started entering into the car at the door level. Yeah. And the only way I could have protected myself in some sense is that I could enter higher ground. I didn't have any higher ground. So there was a mall close by. So I took the refuge into the mall and went into the basement of the mall, and I could save myself from getting entirely flooded, because it's not necessary that all water enters the basement directly, because basements are always, the ramps to the basements are always planned in a manner whereby the waters do not come down. And so my exercise today, here is Yeah, in some sense, my exercise today, in some sense today, is to plan how to go about, how to go about, how to go about planning ramps into the basement, and how to go about planning sumps, ramps into the basement, and how the overall basement structure works. Yeah. So I hope I've in some sense clarified your doubt that basements don't, there is a provision to take care of flooding. Yeah. And yeah, we preferably make sure to see that water does not enter the basement directly, because for any subterranean thing, if I make a small sketch, suppose you have a, forget, you don't have a car parking basement, you just have, suppose you just have a, suppose you just have an area for meant for social interaction or something partly below the ground. Suppose if I plan, there are two ways of planning that. I'm just sketching the first way. One is that I make steps like this, and this is going below the ground, and that's your ground level, and that's your lower level. This is one way of doing it, and but naturally I can expect all the water to come inside, yeah, from the ground level. The other way to plan is that I first create a couple of steps up, come to the upper level, and then start stepping down. Yeah. So these are various ways in order to be ensured that water does not come to your lower levels, because yeah, your waters would be actually restricted to these layers only. But if you plan, yeah, so you should always step up before you go down. Similarly, in car park ramps also, you will find that, yeah, that ramps go actually up before they enter the basement, and then they come down into the basement that is there. And should your building be here, in whatever sense that is there, ramps usually do not start directly. Yeah. So if your road level is here, yeah, ramps go up, they come, and then they slope down into the ground level that is there. Yeah. So this is with regards to avoiding water from going into basements in some sense. I hope I've clarified your doubts, Shravan. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah. Now for where we stopped in the lecture, we'll go into some some finer details. Yeah, considering this is a construction class, we'll get into some finer details of the basement design. That is both. First we'll look at the cross section of both the raft, the retaining wall, and as someone asked, how does it work at the ground level? So if I have to draw, yeah, so if I have to draw, yeah. So what happens is that, as I explained earlier, your raft has a set of bars first at the bottom that usually come right up to the toe and bend upwards. And similarly, I have bars at the bottom that are at the top. So there are two sets of bars in both directions. That means it's a mesh. So, but naturally, also bars in the other direction also. Yeah. So that's what I'm calling about. Bars in both direction, mesh. And I talked about something called as chairs. What does those mean? Those are members, metal members that are put to allow top bars from not sitting down over the lower bars. Yeah, these are chairs. Yeah, they'll be everywhere, spaced out. Yeah, in order to make sure that my lower bar, the upper mesh does not come in, because I'm going to pour concrete. This entire thing is filled with concrete, right? I'm going to pour concrete. Yeah. So I may now, earlier we did see that this, yeah. Now usually the bottom of the raft, yeah, the bottom of the raft is well waterproof. Yeah. So first of all, the bottom of the raft can, you can either have a layer of PCC laid that is there, yeah, in order to make a thorough level onto which you can cast the raft. But more important of all, at this lower level, it becomes necessary that you don't undulate the lower, because you want to create a semi-permeable layer which is called as waterproofing, membrane waterproofing that I do, such that my raft does not leak from the bottom. So there is a waterproofing that is done at the bottom. I apologize for the kind of lines that are coming, yeah, but you need to understand that there is a layer of waterproofing, yeah, as good as a 8 to 10 layer of membrane waterproofing that I'm seeing here, yeah, that is there between. If I have laid a PCC layer, if this is a PCC layer that happens between the PCC layer and the raft that is laid, rafts can vary right from, if it's a small raft, they can vary from 300 to 600 to anything. Yeah, it all depends upon the kind of upthrust and the kind of spans that are there in the columns. Yeah, like in your auditorium, your columns are going to be on either ends of the auditorium. That means that raft will have to be really thick. So rafts can be, in order to be safe, you should consider anywhere between 450 to 750 as depths of the raft. Yeah. Now, you need to understand that the raft and the retaining wall are both homogeneous in some manner. So the bars of the retaining wall are left, okay, in place, like I showed you in that last, like I did show you in the last image. If you look at these bars along the periphery of the raft, if you can see that, yeah, these are bars that are left in place before I start going about concreting my raft below. And these bars are to help, yeah, add further bars for the retaining wall. So the retaining wall also has bars both along the outer periphery of the retaining wall and the inner periphery of the retaining wall. Yeah. And this entire retaining wall is not cast in one go. It is cast in levels. So perhaps yeah, so there is shuttering at the side, but naturally, don't forget that retaining walls are thin. Yeah, retaining walls are really thin. RCC retaining walls, however, may be the upthrust of the ground or the mud beside. Don't forget that there is mud dug here. Yeah, so there is mud dug here. Yeah, all this is soil. Yeah, all this is mud or soil that is there. Yeah, and I've dug that such that I can make my raft and retaining wall both together. Yeah, and perhaps my raft may come and end here at this level. I may want my retaining wall to come and end there. Yeah, so the bars go on top, and bend like that. These bars come and bend on top like that and end there. Now this concrete that is laid in the retaining wall, which is a vertical wall, it is laid in parts and pieces. So the concrete is laid, so in one part like that, second part like that, third part, fourth part. Yeah. And the concrete is not, just give me a second. Yes. So, so what I was coming to is that this retaining wall is concreted in parts and pieces. Now, when I concrete this retaining wall in pieces, and if I leave this concrete like this horizontal, there is good possibility that water can leak from these joints that are there. Yeah. So usually the kind of joint that is done in the concrete is in that sense there is a rebate that is done like that, and there is something called as a watermark. Yeah, that is laid in there in order to make sure Yeah, in order to make sure that the new concrete and the old concrete join together well, and there is not a continuous joint for the water to seep in, to avoid the water to seep in. Yeah. So what you will see, I do not know if you see here, if you see in this cross section, if you see in detail in the cross section to the left, you will find such rebates that are created in the concrete retaining wall, and they are largely done in place in order to make sure, that you have the right kind of rebate. Yeah, you create the joint between the old concrete and the new concrete, and you make sure that your water does not seep in. Yeah, so this is the kind of detailing that is usually done for a retaining wall. Yeah, not to forget that there is a steel bars that are along the outer edge and along the inner edge of the retaining wall. Yeah, now this toe that you see of the raft, helps me to do all kinds of box waterproofing from the outside. Yeah, it creates some kind of a platform all around. Yeah, it creates some kind of a platform all around in order for me to stand there maybe and do sometimes and do a waterproofing layer coat. So waterproofing layer coat is put outside along the wall. Yeah, then sometimes there are tiles, there is a layer of tiles that is laid. Yeah, in staggered joint. Yeah, sometimes there is brickwork also done. Yeah, so there is brickwork that is done. Yeah, in order to what is called as box waterproofing of the outside retaining wall. So the toe in that sense helps me to build all these things all around the retaining wall, and all these layers help me to make subsoil, to avoid subsoil water from coming into the basement in that sense. That means what? If I look at in plan, the plan of a retaining wall, yeah, or the plan of a basement always will be comprising of this kind of RCC retaining wall, waterproofing layer along the outside. Yeah, but natural thickness that is there. But more important of all, I will always see the toe of the raft projecting beyond the retaining wall. So if this is your, if this is your if this is your retaining wall, what I'm seeing beyond the retaining wall, yeah, this in some sense, this is nothing but that. Yeah, the toe of the, this is the toe of the raft that is projecting out, and this can further help me to either do tiling outside, to either help me do brickwork outside, depending upon what is required, what is the kind of detailing that is required for box waterproofing. Is it clear till now? Is it clear? Yeah. Are there any doubts in the idea of casting a raft vis-a-vis a retaining wall? It is all homogeneous. Though I do not cast the entire raft and retaining wall in one go, but I can easily say the first part, at least the first part of the, retaining wall is cast along with the raft. Yeah. Don't forget, if I try to concrete vertical cross sections of a wall all together, it does not work, because all the concrete will settle down. The concrete has a high density, so it will start bulging out the form work by all the concrete. So I cannot concrete the entire retaining wall in one go. I have to do it in parts and pieces. Yeah, and I will have to do yeah. So either if I try to concrete the entire retaining wall in one go, what will happen is all my aggregate may settle down, or the entire concrete may go down and bulge the, yeah, formwork in some, because it has got a high density. So it makes sense to be able to. So bottom line, I am able to cast retaining walls in parts and pieces. These are the kind of joints, the water joint marks or joints that we see, yeah, in the raft, in the retaining wall. Yeah, and you have to waterproof the outside of the retaining wall, and there comes the role of the toe of the raft. Yeah, the toe of the raft is important. That helps in some sense with the waterproofing of the retaining wall. Now, now comes someone asked the question, how does the retaining wall and the top slab merge? So first of all, there are two things. One is that the slab comes separately and may have a beam there, and this may be whatever kind of beam, flat slab, uh, whatever kind of beam that, and there may be a gap in between such that I can have a window. Yeah, so I could have some kind of a window here, and basements have typical windows. I'll come to that detail. There can be a window here, and so there can be a gap. Yeah, and ground level usually ends here. I'm sure you have seen windows. Yeah, basements require ventilation. You need air to come out. So in that sense, yeah, in that sense you have a window there, and so your slab, yeah. But there is nothing wrong to say that if you don't have a window, the slab cannot merge here itself. So your slab can merge with your basement at that level only, at that level itself. All that it will require is that bars are left protruding out such that it can merge with your slab well. So it can merge with your slab well. Yeah. So there may be bars that are kept. Yeah. There may be bars that are kept out and they can merge with your slab well. Now, what kind of windows are usually found in basement for basement ventilation? Yeah. These are called as double framed windows. These are called double framed windows. In order, they are high because they are at a higher level of the basement. They are as good as along the top edge of the basement. So they usually comprise of a double frame. So I'm sketching here at the side. They usually comprise of a double frame. So here is one frame part of it. Here is another frame part of it. The first frame part of it has has a glass at the top part usually there. The bottom frame has glass at this part, and there is a mesh in between. There is a mesh in between to allow ventilation to take place. So the two glasses allow the light to come in both the frames. So this is the front frame. Yeah, the front frame has glass to first upper half of part of it. Yeah, thereby allowing light to come in. The mesh horizontally, allows the ventilation to happen. You don't, let me tell you, basements are hot areas for snakes. Yeah, you have to be very careful if you have a basement inspection. Yeah, and usually basements are dark, they are moist, they are wet, they are flooding in them most of the time, even while construction. I'm talking about construction. And you as an architect, you may want to go and check around and move around on your own site. Nobody stops you, but you can land into an accident. You can either fall into a sump that may not be covered, or you can be bitten by a snake, considering the basement areas have a lot of reptiles hiding there because it's a cold and moist area. And should these windows not fall in place, snakes can come in from these areas. So this arrangement of a window that usually is there, allows both the light and ventilation to continue without anybody having to open or shut the windows. Yeah. So these are kind of windows that do not allow you to open nor shut. Yeah, either to be open or shut, as well as the ventilation to take place such that the the air quality in the basement is always changing, and there is enough light quality without someone having to go about shutting and opening windows at the basement level. Yeah, so I've covered some aspects of detailing of the basement, both at the wall level, at the raft level, at the slab level, and at the ventilation level. These are only details. This is not by way of planning. Now, if there are no issues with regards to this, then I can go to the planning aspects of the basement. Are there any doubts in any of these? Then I can either elaborate, or then I can go into ramp planning and other aspects of the basement.
How did you, can you explain the top slab again? Like to connect that with the ramp wall?
Not the ramp wall. I'm so sorry. The retaining wall.
So so first of all, the upper this slab may be connected to columns. So it may have very little to do with the retaining wall. So the first thing you will wonder is if this slab comes and meets here, if there is a gap between the retaining wall and the slab on top with the help because of the strip windows, how does the load of the slab get into the retaining wall? So the first thing of all that the first thing that is there is that the most of the time when I'm planning a retaining wall or when I'm planning a raft or when I'm planning most of the time there is the two structural systems are different. The column structural system vis-a-vis the retaining wall structural system do not meet each other or may merge with each other. So the slab is not all the time transferring its load to the retaining wall. So there may be a change. Yeah. So there may be, it may not be all connected. So that is one aspect to it. The other aspect to it is that not everywhere is there is strip window. If there is a place where if there is it's like suppose if there is a column here in your retaining wall. Just imagine if there is a column here. Yeah, which is part of the retaining wall. There is a column here which is part of the retaining wall. Are you understanding what I'm saying? In some sense I'm saying that the retaining wall, the column goes and then the retaining wall goes like that. Column comes here again, retaining wall, yeah, column, yeah, things like that. At such point of times where the columns are, you may not have a strip window there. So there may be a window only in the center. There may not be a window here, there may not be a window here, there may be again a window here. So in between bays, there may be windows. Yeah, what I'm trying to say is, so the slab actually comes and connects it. So if there is a column that is there, the slab will get connected to the column, and the slab can afford to have a gap between the retaining wall and the slab such that I can have appropriate ventilation. You got it?
Thank you.
Most of these advanced slab systems, if we are done with the query, now I'll get to planning of I'll go to a new whiteboard. I've saved that whiteboard in case you need it, but I'm sure there are better sketches available. Yeah, I only needed to sketch in order to explain you the detailing of various bars and various detailing that is expected. Yeah, so yeah, so now we'll go into other aspects of the basement planning. The first of the aspect of the basement planning is that, yeah, it makes much more sense if your structural system and if your retaining wall merge together. What do I mean by that? What does that mean? That means that if I have columns, yeah. So what I'm trying to say is that if I have columns here, if I have columns along the periphery of my building, in whatever manner that may be there, yeah, it makes sense if my column structure and my retaining wall all merge together. Yeah, that means if in reality my column and my retaining wall look like that, there's nothing wrong in that. Instead, it's good. Are you getting what I'm trying to say? What I'm trying to say is that the column structure coming from top and the retaining wall that comprise, if the two structural systems merge together, there is nothing like it. It's good. The possibilities of merging a upper column structural system and retaining wall is very much possible because it's all homogeneous. Don't forget, column is in RCC, retaining wall is in RCC. The merging of the two is very simple. But not all the time this helps. Sometimes I do not want the columns to be there along the periphery. Okay, like in the case, so like suppose I'm talking about flat slabs. We all know in flat slabs, as per our earlier discussion, minor discussion, that a flat slab comprises of one-third of its span as a slab strip. One-third of a slab as a slab strip, which is actually, or which is nothing but has more steel in it, and so it can so to say cantilever in that to that extent. Yeah, it can cantilever to that extent. So yeah. So now if I want in case I design a structural system whereby I would like my retaining wall not to be touching my column, then advanced slabs, all of it, ribbed slab, so to say coffered slab, flat slab, all of these have the opportunity. I think all slabs have the opportunity to cantilever out. Every slab has the opportunity to cantilever out. So yeah, so if I want, suppose I make a structural system where these are my columns. Yeah, these are my columns, and I want to use the side as area for the ramp for the car to come in. I want so much space that is there. There is always a good possibility that so much can cantilever out. Yeah, and so my retaining wall can be independent of the column. My retaining wall can always be independent of my column. I'm telling you a reason why this is so important. Yeah, but naturally it cannot be independent to a very large extent, but naturally the column would be close by. Yeah, this column would be somewhere between 3 and 4 meters. Yeah, because you need minimum driveway that is there. And I'll tell you why the reason is because there is a rule that says that my basements can literally go right up to the edge of my plot, though my building cannot. You know what I'm trying to say? If this is my building plot, my building can only afford to be so much. Yeah, we all know we have to leave side open spaces. We have to leave all these side open spaces, right? For fire truck, for side open, yeah, to respect easement. You know what is easement? To respect the light and ventilation of my neighbor, because he may be staying there before me. So if he's staying there and if I go and touch and build right up to his boundary wall, I may actually be affecting his light and ventilation. So that is what is something called as easement rights. That is something called as easement rights. So why would I there is basements have but the rule for basement is that I can literally, not exactly all throughout, but I can literally build right up to the edge of my plot. The minute when I say that I can build right up to the edge of my plot, something like this becomes very important. What is that? That means if my structural system does not go right till the edge of my plot. So there are two, what I'm trying to tell you in your design is that there can be two possibilities. One is that your columns, that your building is as per the columns. You have columns that are there and your columns and your basement clearly coincide with each other. Yeah. This may be part, this may be full, depending. You may have part of the building in which the columns coincide with your retaining wall, or you may have a building structure. You may have a structure in which the retaining wall has nothing to do with the, so to say. Yeah. That means the retaining wall can be completely independent of the structure of the building in some sense. And the two may have nothing to do. Instead, having an independent structural system may help you. Like I'll give you an example in this diagram that is there. Suppose your building sits here. Yeah, suppose your building sits here. Yeah. And these two are extensions of your basement in some sense. These two can actually help you plan ramps to get into your basement. Yeah. So these two can actually help ramps to get into your basement in some sense. Yeah. Yeah. This can actually help to get into. So such provisions or such extensions that may be there, such provisions or extensions that may be there, yeah, at the sides of your basement or in along. So column structure can actually in some sense, now like I'll tell you, uh, I may have in we are all doing an auditorium. Suppose my column structure for my auditorium is in this wedge shape, and those columns further come down into my basement. Yeah. Now, if I try to follow a basement that is of the same profile, I'll have all kinds of problems. I may have all kinds of problems. Thereby, it is very, but if I follow some kind of a ribbed slab system or a flat slab system or any kind of slab system, I have the great opportunity to have a basement floor or retaining walls that are further away from these columns, thereby giving you all kinds of side areas to plan out the basement well. So basement retaining walls and basement and column structure of the building above can be merged together is one possibility, cannot be merged together and can be separate from each other is the other possibility. Just have a glass of water. But is there any doubt? Is there anybody who has not understood this concept well? So columns could merge with your retaining wall, considering both are of the same material. Columns, advanced slab systems can always span out beyond the columns. Yeah. Like I did show in this diagram. Yeah. So if this is 1/3 of your span, this can project out and your retaining wall can be there at the side, thereby helping you. Yeah. Thereby helping you to plan other aspects that are there of the, that are other aspects of the structure, especially like those of ramps and things like that. Because no basement can work if you don't have an appropriate ramp to get below. Yeah. Is this well understood? If this is well understood, we'll go to the next. We'll go. Yeah. We'll go to another aspect. Yeah. That is about actually planning ramps. Yeah. Now there are two types of ramps that actually work for a basement structure. One is called as an inbuilt ramp and one is called as an exposed ramp. Yeah. What do the two mean and what are the kind of challenges both of these pose? Yeah. The first is where usually we tend to do without understanding and creating problems for ourselves is that in plan I may have this building. Yeah. And I may actually start planning the ramp along the outside somewhere there. Yeah, so I may say that my ramp starts dipping down from here. That's my arrow. And as I go further, yeah, this is my ramp. And then at this point of time, it becomes 0 and it comes into my basement below the building. Yeah, so my building is here, but my ramp is outside in some sense, outside the building footprint and can be seen as a new addition. Yeah, and can be seen as a new addition. Clear? Yeah, this is there. Now, yeah, now there poses a big problem here. The big problem here is that exposed ramps are a big threat by way of rain. That means this ramp has to be covered because otherwise all the rain that comes down will come down into the basement. Yeah. So this all needs to be, so this entire needs to be, so sometimes you have polycarbonate, all kinds of weird looking ramp covers. I do not know if you've been to malls and if you've driven down ramps, there are various kind of ramp, there are various kinds of ramp conditions that are there. Bottom line, if this is your building in section, if this is your building, yeah, in section, your ramp at the side may have some kind of a polycarbonate cover like that for your car to go down, and can look pretty odd. Yeah, there is one aspect to it. The other aspect to it is that your ramp becomes part of your structure. That means, yeah, that means if this is your building, yeah, you give an opening on the ground floor part. That means in your plan on the ground floor, you will have some part that is literally like a cutout on the ground floor. That means on the ground floor, if this area is usable, this much part will not be usable. This will be like a cutout. Actually, your ramps are starting here. Beyond a point, it is dipping down and then getting into the basement there, and it is working there. In such sense, how will the elevation look? The elevation will look like that. Yeah. And it will have a cutout in the elevation whereby your ramp is actually entering. Yeah, not only are you seeing this cutout in the elevation of the building, you're also seeing that this cutout reflects in plan such that to the extent where the car dips, whatever that may be there at 1:8, 1:10 slope, that may be some area. Sometimes it may be this entire area, yeah, that you may have a cutout. The building from outside may look the entire thing, but on the ground floor only so much may be usable because your ramp is actually eating into that part of for the head height before it turns and gets down into the basement, and then you have lost enough head height that is there. Is this clear to everybody? Yeah, is this clear to everybody? The two conditions: ramp outside. So you may ramp this way, then you may another ramp may again come out like this, and a ramp may come out like that. Then in that case, there will be some polycarbonate or whatever new ramp, new roofing system, whatever system that may be there. Yeah, to cover the roof that is there before the car comes out, and then Batnache. Yeah. So these, if you keep ramps on the outside, they will need some kind of roof cover. If you have suppose your roof from here goes all the way and takes care of it, nothing like it. Yeah. Or you have a roof cover that goes like that and covers all of it, then there is no problem. But if you are thinking of a separate, like this is a separate building and the roof cover of your ramp is something different, then it will looks pretty odd. And in that sense, this is more the preferred option in some sense. Now, the last of the criteria, the ramp that comes down. So if this is the basement, whatever be the basement, the ramp that comes out, usually the ramp comes down along the periphery. Ramps can enter along the center also, but most ramps usually enter along the periphery. Suppose this is the ramp that comes down and bends and whatever that. The ramp will have its own structural system. That means the columns at the sides of the ramp, yeah, they don't forget the ramp is a sloping structure. The slab is sloping down, right? Since the slab is sloping down, you might as well have its own column structure. Thereby, it will have beams. Yeah. Thereby, it allows the ramp structure. So, what I'm trying to draw is this is the ramp structure. It will have its own set of columns and beams. And it has nothing to do with the rest of the building. Once this ramp comes down, and so this is the ramp. There will be beams that are there. These are the beams that I'm showing. These beams are going from one column to another. But naturally, when the ramp comes and meets the raft, then it will merge. But naturally, the raft will merge. But what I'm trying to say is, don't try to complicate and try to match your upper building columns to become that of the ramp. That is usually tends to be difficult. Ramp columns are lightweight. So you may have a retaining wall there at the side. There is no problem. You may have a retaining wall there at the side, considering ramps are usually there at the periphery. But columns will protrude out. Yeah, columns will protrude out may protrude out and may not go along the entire height. They may not go along the entire height. They may only go up to the height at which the ramp is expected based on the slope that is there. Yeah. Is there any doubt till now? Till these three topics that I've covered with the understanding of the basement and the basement ramp and all other aspects? Anybody has any query? Anybody has any doubt? It's already 3:15. I can take some doubts if there are. I will also tell you that what are the kind of I cannot write here. If I was on a blackboard, I could have written. What are the kind of functions that will be there in a building like this? So first of all, the ramps will take you down. But the best of the ramps can be seen. Best of a ramp for such a building, if you want to see, is the ramp that works for the Salisbury Arts Center. Yeah. But it's an open ramp. So in that sense, it doesn't work because it may allow rain and frost and all of that to come in. The bottom line first is the ramp that allows you to come in. Then below the at the basement level you will have what is well known as is the air conditioned plant room. Yeah. So if this is the entire basement, and wherever your auditorium or whatever sits, your air conditioning plant room. So if I have a plant room here somewhere, the plant room allows the basement, the plant room allows the basement slab for me to carry the cold water lines up, hot water lines to that corner, cold water lines, hot water lines to this corner before it climbs up and comes into the auditorium. So this raft slab or this slab of the top of the basement actually helps me run services and allows me to puncture and enter into the building as and where I want. So though my AC plant may be in one corner, but it allows me to take cold air vertically wherever I want. It allows me to take cold air, cold water wherever I want. So basements help in centralized services, big time. Yeah. So should you want to have a water tank below? Should you want to have an electric substation below? Should you want to have AC plant is a must? Yeah, those are there. Then most of the time basements also allow for what is called as revolving and moving stages. Yeah. Suppose if this is your auditorium cross section and this is your stage. This is your auditorium cross section. That may be your balcony. This is your stage. The basement allows, what is well known as an orchestra pit or a surprise pit. Suppose you want someone to enter from below. Yeah. Then this part of the stage can actually go below right up to the basement and arise up. Like in NCPA, there is an entire big motor here that allows the stage to revolve. So this stage above can revolve because it is sitting on top of a motor, and the motor allows the entire stage to revolve entire 360 degrees. But beyond that, the opportunities for entering the stage from below the basement always are there. So that part of the stage should always be kept in a manner whereby opportunities for the stage to go up, come down, for entry into the stage, for services onto the stage, sound wires, light wires. If you want people to collapse into the stage, all those aspects can take place if you have a basement below. And then, but naturally, basements help you for storages, furniture storages, all kinds of storages, parking. Don't forget, if you are in an urban setup, like many people are doing their auditoriums in Bombay, then but naturally you need to give at least 1/3 of the seating area. That means 50 cars as parking layout into the basement. So parking layout is something that you should know, that car sizes are 2.5 by 2.5 by 3.5, 6 meter by 6 meter grids work wonderfully well. for 2 cars to sit in them. But beyond that, the structure columns that come down can help you to plan car parks as and how much you want. 50 cars is not a big deal for a project like this. Yeah. And even if they are a little less than 50, I don't think many people are going to take objection. As far as you've understood that the area to make the basement, this is very important. The basement is an expensive ordeal. Making the basement is an expensive ordeal. Make sure you have planned and used the basement well. There should not be large vacant spaces in the basement of no use to anybody. To make these retaining walls, to make these raft, and to make all aspects of the basement, yeah, is important. Yeah. And that's why, yeah, all aspects of the basement planning has to be done well. Waste of any basement area, that means that you have not planned your basement well, and all those investment towards the basement can be not well used. Yeah. So in that sense, plan your basements well. I must tell you, last year we asked, yeah, so I'll come to that a little later. Last year we asked in the exam students to park to plan a basement parking, and there was huge UN cry saying that this is outside the syllabus. If they had only looked at the 5th semester syllabus, which says that that shallow basements are part of their syllabus. Yeah. So when basements were asked, because in their design last year technology studio, the buildings did not ask for basements, and so they had not gone about resolving a basement. So when it was asked in the exam, and but naturally something that I'm going to teach in class, I'm going to make sure that it is either part of the technology studio or it's part of the exam. I'm not going to let any of my effort in teaching go waste. I'm going to make sure that whatever taught to you is put to the test, either in the studio or in the exam. So if Neeraj may recollect, last year when we gave in the exam, there was a hue and cry that we've not been taught basements and stuff like that. Thankfully, this time we've done that. And let me tell you, I've already discussed with your other technology guides. Should you have an urban project, it is mandatory for you to plan the basement. I'm repeating myself. Should you have an urban project, it is mandatory for you to plan the basement. Should you not have an urban project and should you be working in a rural setup, then you are supposed to sketch a basement but maybe to the shape and size of your building in your sketchbook and show it to your guides. Am I making myself very clear? Should you have an urban project, then but naturally the basement air conditioning room, server room, whatever, yeah, substation, all of that. Because in an urban project, basements make lot of sense. They are like getting free area. They are not included in FSI. You only have to build it and pay for it. Beyond that, it is free area. You can build as much as you want and you don't have to calculate as part of FSI. And I do not know if you understand FSI well. FSI is something that is governed by laws. You can't build in if it is a usable area, you can't build to your whims and fancy. But if you're working, if your project is in Gadchiroli or any other, yeah, or any other, so to say, rural area, and should you decide, yeah, that making a basement in the rural area, actually your entire town may not have any basement. You may think that making the basement may not make sense. Your project may be of a very different scale, maybe of a very different quality. Making a basement may seem out of place. No problem. Do not include the basement in your tech studio, but nevertheless, you will have to sketch the basement in your sketchbook, both by way of plan elevation, plan and sections. Yeah, make sure all the requirements that are required for your proposal are incorporated in that, and shown to your guides that are there. This has been put up amidst the guides and everybody knows about it. Yeah. Now beyond this, should anybody have any doubt, then I can go about sketching, resolving anything further. Yeah. Or then I can stop presenting my screen. Any doubts for the day? Neeraj, is there anything you'd want to add?
No, I guess that's what actually even in my group people were asking about the basement. Acha, there is one question in chat. What
Sure.
amount of headspace is required for above the ramp if it is included inside or something? So,
Car height
clear-
is, car heights are, everybody should know car heights. Everybody knows what is a car height. Yeah. I think anything above, I think ramp, overall basement and any ramp height should be a minimum of 2.4.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
8
Clear
feet
height.
is what is 8 feet is what is maximum required, minimum or minimum required for any kind of basement heights, both below as well as at the ramp level. Yeah. So that's why when you want to cut out a ramp into your building, that means that 8 feet height kind of a cutout will be there in your building facade. Yeah, because that's the kind of head height that is required. 2.4 bare minimum. Beyond that, you can have more, but having large heights in basement is not advisable. That's why using of advanced slabs in basement is very advisable, because it cuts down on your beam heights, thereby cuts down on your material use by way of retaining wall and stuff like that. Any other query? Is everything clear?
But
Should everybody
one
should,
thing just I
should
want to
every,
add.
yeah.
Okay, just one thing, guys. You also have to think about circulation of a car as well. Don't turn around at a corner without understanding the turning radius of a car. That is, I mean, I observed
So
that
that is
in my,
so that is
yeah.
all for you to do, preferably today. Today, for
Ah,
those people who want to attempt the, so please, now there is one very important point that I need to make to the entire class, which I do not know if you gather. For every marking that takes place in a technology studio, like last time there was a 30 marking. I do not know if you're aware, though we have not progressed to that extent, but there is a marking that was due last time. It comprised of marking for ARD, it comprised for marking for site selection, it comprised marking for some idea of plan and section of the building, some idea of the building. There was 30 marks that was there. Now many people may have not come to the stage of plan and section on that day of the marking. There is no problem, but you get only one option for the next class to be able to upgrade your marks. That means if last time was a marking of 30 marks, it is this time that I will have to freeze those 30 marks and confirm those 30 marks. Beyond this time, I am not in any position to go and change those marks. Is this clear to everybody? That means, and it is valid, because what happens is that suppose you design something, someone designed something. Okay, he designed with all his heart and mind, and he put it up on one Wednesday on the day of the marking. But some things didn't go right. I didn't agree to it. I told Shravan, perhaps this is not working well, that's not working well, stuff like that. And so I'm not in a position to mark Shravan well. So instead of marking Shravan a good 5 or 6 or 7 out of 10, and that point of time, I'm able to mark Shravan only a 3. But Shravan has understood what is expected. By next time, if he improves upon that and comes in, the next class I have the opportunity to improve that 3 to 7. But beyond the next class, how much ever work you do, that's all very good. For the overall progress of the studio, you do have to keep working. But your marks will not improve. Your marks will not upgrade. The marks upgrade only one class beyond the marking date. I hope I'm making this very clear. Last week was the second week of July. It was the day of marking for technology. Most people did not have their plans and sections, schematic plans and sections in place. That's why I made it a point last Tuesday to cover schematic sections and structural systems. Today, again, I'm making it a point to take one component of the schematic section. Having schematic sections and plans is now a must. Most people in my group have it. And next, that is tomorrow, everybody is going to, you have the opportunity to upgrade it and mark it. Now, the other thing that is there, everybody should be responsible for his or her own marks. Is as good as your fees. Should you not get your fees, you are not bothered whether the rest of the classes got it or not. It becomes very mandatory for a student to know, or for a student to ask his or her own faculty, that has he been marked for the marks that were due to him. Yeah, like last time you had 30 marks. Are you all aware whether you are marked for 30 marks? Shravan, are you aware that whether in whose group are you, Shravan? Shravan is missing.
He's there in the meeting.
So Fleur, in whose group are you in?
Sorry, Jimmy, my audio was a bit glitchy. Did you mention my
so-
name or did you say?
So what I'm asking you, in whose group are you, Shravan?
I'm in Shantanu's group, but once the first years come, I will be rotating out. I'll get
Whatever.
it.
So what I'm trying to say is that Shravan should have the Shravan at the end of, if he knows that last time was a marking of 30 marks, he should be in a position to ask Shravan whether he's been marked for 30 and whether there is a possibility for him to upgrade next time or so. This is an example I'm giving. Suppose there is someone in my group, he or she should have the courtesy and the what to say, himmat, or courage to ask, am I being marked for whatever that is there? Or I may say, no, you do not have enough work this time. Perhaps the next time I can take the opportunity and upgrade those marks. That kind of discussion should be there. It's as good as asking your client, when am I going to get my next set of fees? I've already put up my bill. The client may say, oh, I'm expecting some money in the couple of 1 week or so. And the minute I get that, I'll make sure I'm going to give you that. You're not going to shy away from asking your fees. Why should you shy away from asking for your marks? You're going to work for it. But you should know how to ask for it. Yeah, there's something called as some courtesy. And you should be bothered about your own marks, and you should more very well know that there were 30 marks. Have you cleared or not? Most people remain surprised at the end that I didn't know, my guide didn't mark me, I never asked, stuff and like. And these markings are going to be very frequent. So it makes sense to note these two things. First, that after every marking, the next class you have the opportunity to always upgrade those marks. It's only the next class. Beyond that, that means it's the third week also that you can help upgrade the marks. The fourth week loses the opportunity to upgrade the marks. Point number 2, have the courtesy to ask your guide always whether you've been marked, whether you're doing well, whether you're passing or failing or whatever, and is there a possibility to upgrade. Yeah, if he says no, you're not doing well, if you do upon these things, I'll make sure that I can upgrade. You should do that. No, at least you know where you stand, and your progress is your responsibility, not your guide's responsibility. Your guide is meant to mark, we hold him responsible, we make sure that by the next class his marks are fed. That means if I do not put up my marks by this Wednesday, someone will call me and say, Jimmy, your marks are not in place, or Neeraj, your marks are not in place. So we are followed up constantly. Like that, similarly, it also is your responsibility to follow up with your guide to see whether your marks fall in place. I think I've spoken a lot about marks. Is there anybody who has any particular doubt, would like to share his or her screen such that we can help him in any particular structural problem, design problem, anything that you think discussion today will help you resolve your design better for tomorrow? then we can use this opportunity now to do that, since it is already 3:30. Anybody?